At this point, you can probably predict a Dwayne Johnson movie before it even starts. Big action, some jokes, a lot of charisma. And while that formula has made him one of the biggest stars on the planet, it's also led to one major criticism: that his career feels calculated. And not in a strategic way to build his acting portfolio and diversify it like most actors who simply enjoy the craft and making great films do, but simply in a way that puts him in the best possible position to just be the most bankable actor or someone that's consistently just safe. He started out likable and as a star on the rise with the potential for mass appeal, but as his paychecks began to double and triple in size and he amassed more of a following and influence, some people have been getting the impression that he's become way more concerned about his overall appearance and brand than actually making a good film, pretty much sticking to the same formula time and time again. Now, if you didn't already know, The Rock didn't start out in acting, but made the transition from being a WWE wrestler back in 1999 and 2000, making an appearance in that 70s show and Star Trek Voyager. But he would get his big break as the Scorpion King in the 2001 movie The Mummy Returns, which was an okay first step into the world of acting and film, but it wasn't great. The CGI was terrible, but so was his acting. But that would be overshadowed by the whole video game final boss fight sequence that they had him in. But audiences still left the theaters feeling as though there was something there. But shortly after that, he would land the starring role in the film The Scorpion King that would be released the following year. He started trying a few different genres of films, but it became pretty clear over the next few years that The Rock kind of struggled with playing or disappearing into a character. So eventually writers and directors just started making characters around The Rock's already cemented ex-wrestler personality. But that didn't really come until some time later. But he would start out with a few more action films like The Rundown, Walking Tall, and Doom, which all did relatively horrible except for maybe The Rundown. So now those managers and agents started panicking a little bit and decided to start throwing things at the wall and put him in literally everything that they could think of to see what would stick. So there were the sports dramas like The Gridiron Gang in 2006. Then he started showing up in more family-friendly films like Game Plan, Race to Witch Mountain, The Tooth Fairy, and Journey 2, which was kind of weird to see him in if you were a fan of the wrestling era. He was definitely a very different version of himself. But after those did decently, he tried his hand at some more comedies like Get Smart in 2008 and The Other Guys in 2010. Now, the 2010s is when his team finally found the formula they and The Rock would use for the next decade plus of his career. So eventually, after years of The Rock not really becoming someone else or the character he's supposed to depict in a lot of his early films, Hollywood just started creating characters around The Rock, like I said earlier. One of those major ones being Luke Hobbs, who's introduced to audiences in the 2011 film Fast 5. Which was of course the fifth movie in the Fast and Furious franchise that will probably never end. But Luke Hobbs is a highly skilled bounty hunter from the DSS who's been tasked with capturing Dominic Toretto, played by Vin Diesel, along with his team. But eventually Hobbs decides to become an ally. They were simply following the blueprint of his Scorpion King film, where he's just playing a louder version of himself with a bigger screen presence. The characters moving onwards are just simpler and not that complex. We got films like G.I. Joe, Retaliation, Pain and Gain, Hercules, and San Andreas, which was really just the start of what some folks have referred to as rock slop, where he simply optimized for consistency rather than transformation. Then there were films like Central Intelligence, Rampage, Skyscraper, and Baywatch, where he really just had to be the big, like literally big, heroic guy in the room. Now don't worry, we're going to get to the Fast and Furious elephant in the room in just a bit, because that led to a whole other issue. Jumanji was another set of films where he could simply just play a video game character that was physically the most dominant looking person in the room, who's occasionally like a semi-corny type of funny. The settings and names might change, but overall, all these characters are basically the same. Now, I can't really knock him for it because this worked for a really long time and these films made bank. Audiences would show up knowing exactly the type of film they were going to be watching because they knew what they were getting if The Rock was starring in it. So if they were in the mood for that type of film, they were more often than not going to spend the money to watch it. From earthquakes to collapsing skyscrapers and battling animals, the stakes would seem to increase, but The Rock would always, and I mean always, come out on top and with barely a scratch. He had been referred to as the next big action star in a similar fashion to Arnold Schwarzenegger. While other actors sought after reinvention, The Rock was seemingly way more interested in building a brand and being consistently himself, because that's what was making the money. But what was pretty interesting was that he managed to crank out all of these films while still keeping the reputation of being the nice guy in Hollywood. Someone who was relatable and down to earth, and this would be the case for a number of years until a different narrative started being spun. There was the whole In-N-Out situation where he kept allegedly claiming to eating an In-N-Out burger for the first time ever, when he'd clearly gone to In-N-Out and also had their burger several times before. It was definitely giving weird, overly curated vibes like he was trying to relate to fans. But it was becoming increasingly clear that he was becoming a product and wasn't so much just a person anymore. Around this time is also when we started hearing stories from those who had worked with him in the past and described him as being controlling and needing to maintain a very specific image, which definitely matches up. Now, leading up to this point in time, all the way from 2016, there had also been a feud of sorts going on between Vin Diesel and The Rock, which started with The Rock calling his male co-stars of the Fast and Furious franchise unprofessional. He also talks about scenes in the film where he was actually angry, but he tried to stay in character. However, Vin Diesel would come out in 2017 and say that everything was blown out of proportion. But as the years would wear on and more Fast and Furious films and spin-offs would be released, it became clear that there was some tension between The Rock and more than just Vin Diesel, as there were several of his castmates that hinted at him being the reason for the delay of films. The Rock always wanted to look like the unbeatable character that could never lose. And this would also be the case reportedly for Jason Statham when it came to the film Hobbs and Shaw. They both refused to lose a fight or appear weak in any way on screen. Apparently, Vin Diesel also had something similar in his contract, which made demands that would limit the amount of punishment their characters would take in fights. Clearly, all of this is very ego-driven, but it's pretty wild how deep something like this really goes for some of these male actors. It really drives home the issue of The Rock in particular not being able to put himself aside to bring a character to life, because he's so focused on looking and appearing a certain way to viewers. He would sit out of the F9 film reportedly because of creative differences, but in this case, more than likely meaning he couldn't get the level of control he wanted, along with the public feud between him and his co-star Vin Diesel. But he did reappear in Fast X and seemingly patch things up with Vin. But The Rock would continue on making his movie slop until 2022, when we would get the DC film Black Adam. Now, this was supposed to be The Rock's passion project that he had been talking about and hyping up for years. He had managed to insert himself in almost every level when it came to the making of this movie through the use of his production company, 7 Bucks Productions. He pushed for certain creative decisions and directions, and bypassed standard DC Studios leadership to position his character as the center of the DC universe. Rather than building him as the traditional arch-nemesis to Zachary Levi's Shazam, The Rock insisted on giving Black Adam a standalone origin story with a different, much darker tone. He even demanded Henry Cavill return as Superman so that his Black Adam character could be seen confronting and battling him in the film. It was all supposed to be the foundation of The Rock's DC empire, but unfortunately, it didn't quite work out that way. The film would be released in October of 2022 and definitely did not come anywhere close to meeting expectations, especially financially. So The Rock would simply pivot and actually try his hand at transforming himself to become a character rather than what he had been doing all these years. This is when we would get the movie The Smashing Machine, which aimed to tell the true story of mixed martial arts and UFC fighter Mark Kerr. It looked like this was potentially a play at being a serious actor for The Rock. So it seemed like he might have realized that actually putting effort into acting and disappearing behind a character is what actually gets you respect. He actually seemed like a real human for once, with depth and a little bit of range. He dials his Dwayne "The Rock" Johnson persona back for a bit and really commits to the character and pushing himself emotionally. Now, this didn't mean that the film was something life-changing and transformational. It was pretty average at best. But it was the first film in a while where he really tried. You could really see that this was his attempt at a breakthrough rebrand, but that didn't really happen in my opinion. It's been so many years of the same, and the pivot just kind of fell through. But anyway, back in early 2024, he would make a major return to WWE, appearing on the January 1st episode of Raw, and later joining the TKO board of directors. He then competed in his first match in over 8 years at WrestleMania XL in April 2024, teaming up with Roman Reigns against Cody Rhodes and Seth Rollins. But his return overall was met with quite a bit of pushback rather than excitement. But then he would disappear again from the WWE due to his demanding schedule, apparently. And it just seemed like he was simply using this appearance to get back in the public's good graces, and of course, to stroke his own ego. He would return to making the same types of films as before, like the live-action Moana and Jumanji. And I just cannot get over that wig that he was wearing for Moana. But it's pretty obvious that he's just looking for a hit because he hasn't had one in a while. Recently, we've also been seeing a much smaller Rock as he's been slimming down and shedding quite a bit of muscle mass. He's claimed it was just so that he didn't put himself in a box and could get different roles from what he's had in the past. But many people have speculated that he just stopped taking certain performance-enhancing drugs because his size and muscle mass after a certain age can be difficult to maintain. But when it comes to The Rock as an actor, I think safe in the beginning of his career was fine. But now, after all these years, it's possible that people are just getting tired of the monotony because it's just become so predictable and boring. Instead of reinvention, he keeps circling back to the same old, same old. But what are your thoughts? Let me know down in the comments. I'll catch you all in the next one.